My name is Claire, and I'm 30 years old. If you'd asked my parents what they thought about my wedding a month before it happened, they would have laughed before answering. My mother actually did laugh. Then she looked around the dining table, smiled at my aunt, and said, "It's more of a backyard barbecue than a real wedding." My father chuckled and added, "Well, when you marry a high school teacher instead of someone with ambition, you get a wedding that matches the budget." Everyone laughed except me. I smiled because I had spent my entire life pretending their words didn't hurt. But that night, as I drove home with my fiancé Ethan, I cried so hard I had to pull over on the side of the road. Ethan reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. "They don't get to decide what our wedding means," he said quietly. He was right, but hearing that from the man I loved didn't erase 30 years of feeling like I would always come second in my own family. Growing up, my younger sister Vanessa was the star of every room she entered. She was beautiful, outgoing, and somehow always managed to turn ordinary achievements into family celebrations. When she got accepted into a private university, my parents threw a party with nearly 100 guests. When she landed her first marketing job, they bought her a brand new SUV. When I graduated at the top of my nursing program, my father shook my hand and asked if hospitals even paid enough to cover student loans. After a while, I stopped expecting applause. I learned to celebrate my victories quietly. I built my career one 12-hour shift at a time, rented a small apartment, and slowly saved every extra dollar I could. By the time Ethan proposed, after 2 years together, we'd already agreed on one thing. We weren't going into debt for a single day. Instead of booking a luxury ballroom, we rented a family-owned botanical garden just outside the city. It wasn't flashy. There were no crystal chandeliers or marble staircases, just towering oak trees, blooming roses, and enough string lights to make the entire garden glow after sunset. To me, it was perfect. To my parents, it was embarrassing. My mother couldn't stop comparing it to Vanessa's upcoming engagement party at an expensive country club. "You couldn't even afford a hotel ballroom?" she asked one afternoon while pretending to help me assemble invitations. "We didn't want one," I answered. She smiled the same smile she'd worn my entire childhood whenever she thought I was settling for less. "Sweetheart," she said, "people remember elegant weddings. They don't remember cheap ones." I looked down at the invitation in my hands and kept folding it, because arguing had never changed anything. My father was even worse. Every conversation somehow became another reminder that Ethan wasn't the kind of man he had imagined for me. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a surgeon. He wasn't a corporate executive. He taught history at the local high school because he genuinely loved helping teenagers believe they could build better futures than the ones they'd been born into. My father called that wasted potential. What made his judgment even harder to understand was that Ethan never defended himself. He never tried to impress anyone. Every insult was answered with the same calm smile. Every sarcastic comment rolled off his shoulders like rain. I once asked him how he stayed so patient. He laughed softly and said, "People who measure others by money usually miss everything that actually matters." At the time, I thought he was simply being kind. I had no idea how much truth was hidden behind those words. 3 days before the wedding, my parents came to the garden for the rehearsal. The florist was arranging white roses along the aisle while volunteers hung hundreds of tiny lights through the trees. Ethan and I stood back, smiling as everything we'd spent nearly a year planning finally came together. "It looks beautiful," our wedding coordinator whispered. Before I could answer, my mother looked around the garden and sighed dramatically. "I still can't believe this is the venue," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Honestly, it feels more like a neighborhood picnic than a wedding." My father folded his arms. "I just hope none of my business clients ever see these photos," he muttered. "They'll think we've fallen on hard times." A few of the vendors exchanged uncomfortable glances. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Before I could say anything, Ethan gently wrapped his hand around mine. "It's okay," he whispered. I nodded, but standing there between the people building our dream and the parents tearing it apart, I silently made myself a promise. This was the last time I would ever beg for their approval. At the time, I believed the worst. Part of my wedding would be listening to my parents mock everything we'd worked so hard to create. I couldn't have imagined that less than 48 hours later, one unexpected guest would recognize my husband and set off a chain of events that would change my parents' lives forever. The morning of our wedding arrived with clear skies and the kind of soft, spring sunshine photographers dream about. I woke before my alarm, too excited to sleep, and for a few quiet minutes, I convinced myself that maybe my parents would surprise me. Maybe seeing everything come together would remind them this wasn't about appearances. It was about their daughter. By noon, I knew I had been fooling myself. My mother arrived nearly 40 minutes late, stepped out of her car wearing designer sunglasses, and the first words out of her mouth weren't "You look beautiful." She looked around the garden and sighed. "I suppose it'll do." My father followed behind her, speaking on his phone about a meeting scheduled for Monday morning. He barely glanced at me before asking where the coffee station was. It should have ruined my mood. Instead, something unexpected happened. The guests who actually mattered began arriving. My nursing coworkers hugged me one after another. Ethan's fellow teachers laughed while helping elderly relatives find their seats. Our neighbors carried homemade desserts, even though we'd told them not to bring anything. Every person who walked through the entrance came because they genuinely wanted to celebrate with us. For the first time all day, I stopped noticing my parents. The ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for. Standing beneath the old oak trees, I looked into Ethan's eyes as we exchanged our vows, and nothing else seemed to exist. Not my mother's judgment, not my father's disappointment, just us. When the officiant announced us as husband and wife, the applause echoed through the garden. I caught my parents clapping politely, but neither of them smiled. At the reception, things became worse. My mother complained about the menu. My father joked to one of his friends that we'd probably saved money by skipping a ballroom. I heard every word. So did Ethan. He simply squeezed my hand beneath the table and whispered, "Let's enjoy our day." Then, just as dinner was being served, I noticed a black luxury sedan pull quietly into the parking area. A man in his early 60s stepped out, dressed in a tailored navy suit. He carried no gift, no camera, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to being noticed without asking for attention. I assumed he had wandered into the wrong venue. Before I could ask anyone, Ethan stood up. The expression on his face changed completely. He walked directly toward the man, smiling with genuine warmth. The older gentleman opened his arms and embraced him like family, not like distant relatives, not like business acquaintances, like someone he deeply respected. They spoke for nearly a minute before Ethan turned and gestured toward me. The man walked over, shook my hand with both of his, and said, "Claire, I've been looking forward to meeting the woman who convinced this stubborn young man to finally take a weekend off." I laughed politely, still trying to figure out who he was. He congratulated us, wished us a lifetime of happiness, and quietly took a seat at one of the empty tables near the back. Across the reception, I noticed my father staring. He leaned toward my mother. "Do you know who that is?" he whispered. She shook her head. "No, neither did I." But something about the way several guests kept glancing toward the man made me realize he wasn't just another late arrival. And when my father suddenly stopped laughing for the first time all afternoon, I had the unmistakable feeling that our wedding day was about to take a turn none of us could have predicted. Dinner had barely ended when I noticed my father excuse himself from his table. He wasn't heading toward the dessert station or the restrooms. His eyes were fixed on the man in the navy suit. For a moment, I thought he was finally going to introduce himself. Instead, he stopped halfway across the garden. The confidence I'd seen all morning vanished from his face. He looked nervous. That alone caught my attention. My father had spent more than 25 years working as a regional operations manager for one of the state's largest commercial construction firms. He was the kind of man who loved titles, expensive watches, and reminding everyone how important his clients were. I'd never once seen him hesitate to approach anyone, until now. Before he could take another step, another black sedan pulled into the parking area. Then another. 3 people in business attire walked toward the reception together. The moment they entered the garden, they smiled at the older gentleman. "Mr. Whitmore," one of them said warmly, extending his hand. The same Only
last
then
name
did
my
I hear the
father had
name
mentioned.
clearly. Dozens of times over the years, whenever he talked about the company's biggest commercial client, the conversations at nearby tables slowly faded as several guests noticed the small gathering. My father finally reached them. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, with an awkward smile. What an unexpected surprise. The older man looked at him for several seconds before speaking. Richard. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I didn't realize Claire was your daughter. My father's smile tightened. Yes, yes, she is. Mr. Whitmore glanced toward Ethan, who had just returned carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. His expression immediately softened. Ethan, he said, I hope I'm not stealing too much attention from your wedding. Ethan laughed. You've always had perfect timing. My father blinked. You know each other? For the first time all afternoon, Ethan looked genuinely confused. I thought you knew. The silence that followed seemed to swallow the entire garden. Mr. Whitmore turned toward my father. I've known Ethan for almost 8 years. My father's face lost its color. 8 years? That was years before Ethan and I had even met. Mr. Whitmore continued. When my wife passed away, Ethan volunteered at the Community Literacy Foundation. She started every Saturday for nearly 3 years. He smiled proudly. He never missed a weekend. I looked at Ethan. He had never told me that, not once. And when we decided to expand the Whitmore Education Foundation, Mr. Whitmore continued, there was only one person I trusted to help design the scholarship program. He rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. This young man, I could almost hear my father's heartbeat from where I stood. For years, he'd dismissed Ethan as just a teacher, yet one of the most influential business leaders in the state was speaking about him with unmistakable admiration. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Mr. Whitmore looked directly at my father. I've spent years doing business with your company. He paused. But I can tell you something with complete certainty. No contract I've ever signed has impressed me half as much as the character of the man your daughter married. The garden fell silent. No one reached for their drinks. No one spoke. My father opened his mouth, searching for a response, but nothing came out. Mr. Whitmore wasn't finished. I arrived a little late, he said. One of your guests explained that you've spent months making jokes about this being a cheap wedding. His eyes slowly swept across the garden. I've attended weddings that cost $1 million. Then he smiled at Ethan and me. And I've attended very few that felt this rich. A quiet wave of applause began somewhere behind us. Within seconds, nearly every guest was clapping. I looked toward my parents. My mother's eyes were fixed on the ground. My father stood perfectly still, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The same last name my father had mentioned dozens of times over the years. Whenever he talked about the company's biggest commercial client, the conversations at nearby tables slowly faded as several guests noticed the small gathering. My father finally reached them. Mr. Whitmore, he said, with an awkward smile. What an unexpected surprise. The older man looked at him for several seconds before speaking. Richard. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I didn't realize Claire was your daughter. My father's smile tightened. Yes, yes, she is. Mr. Whitmore glanced toward Ethan, who had just returned carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. His expression immediately softened. Ethan, he said, I hope I'm not stealing too much attention from your wedding. Ethan laughed. You've always had perfect timing. My father blinked. You know each other? For the first time all afternoon, Ethan looked genuinely confused. I thought you knew. The silence that followed seemed to swallow the entire garden. Mr. Whitmore turned toward my father. I've known Ethan for almost 8 years. My father's face lost its color. 8 years? That was years before Ethan and I had even met. Mr. Whitmore continued. When my wife passed away, Ethan volunteered at the Community Literacy Foundation. She started every Saturday for nearly 3 years. He smiled proudly. He never missed a weekend. I looked at Ethan. He had never told me that, not once. And when we decided to expand the Whitmore Education Foundation, Mr. Whitmore continued, there was only one person I trusted to help design the scholarship program. He rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. This young man, I could almost hear my father's heartbeat from where I stood. For years, he'd dismissed Ethan as just a teacher, yet one of the most influential business leaders in the state was speaking about him with unmistakable admiration. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Mr. Whitmore looked directly at my father. I've spent years doing business with your company. He paused. But I can tell you something with complete certainty. No contract I've ever signed has impressed me half as much as the character of the man your daughter married. The garden fell silent. No one reached for their drinks. No one spoke. My father opened his mouth, searching for a response, but nothing came out. Mr. Whitmore wasn't finished. I arrived a little late, he said. One of your guests explained that you've spent months making jokes about this being a cheap wedding. His eyes slowly swept across the garden. I've attended weddings that cost $1 million. Then he smiled at Ethan and me. And I've attended very few that felt this rich. A quiet wave of applause began somewhere behind us. Within seconds, nearly every guest was clapping. I looked toward my parents. My mother's eyes were fixed on the ground. My father stood perfectly still, unable to meet anyone's gaze. We left for our honeymoon the morning after the wedding, determined not to let anyone else's behavior overshadow the happiest weekend of our lives. We rented a small lakeside cabin 3 hours from the city, turned our phones off, and spent 2 peaceful days hiking, cooking together, and talking about everything except my parents. On the third morning, I switched my phone back on. It exploded with notifications, 38 missed calls, dozens of text messages. Most of them were from my mother. The first voicemail was demanding. The second sounded worried. By the fifth, she was crying. I listened to the last message first. Claire, please call me. It's about your father. Something happened at work. I looked at Ethan, who quietly set his coffee mug down. I think it's time, he said. When I called her back, my mother answered before the first ring had finished. Claire, thank goodness. Her voice was shaking. She explained that early Monday morning, my father's biggest client, Charles Whitmore, had requested a private meeting with the company's executive team. My father assumed it would be another routine contract discussion. It wasn't. Instead, Mr. Whitmore reportedly began the meeting by placing a photograph from our wedding on the conference table. It was the moment Ethan and I were walking back down the aisle together, smiling while our guests applauded. Then he asked a simple question. Does anyone here know why your regional manager spent months mocking his own daughter's wedding? No one answered. According to my mother, Mr. Whitmore didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten to cancel contracts. He simply said that character mattered to him just as much as competence. If a man measures people by money instead of integrity, he reportedly told the executives, I have to wonder how he measures the people he does business with. The room fell silent. My father tried to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding, that he had been joking, that people had taken his comments out of context. But the damage had already been done. The executives had heard enough. He wasn't fired, but he was removed from the leadership program he'd spent nearly 2 years working toward. The promotion he had expected by the end of the year was given to someone else. For the first time in his career, his reputation, not his performance, had become the reason he was passed over. My mother begged me to make a public post defending them. She wanted me to tell people they had always supported our marriage. She wanted me to say the internet had misunderstood everything. I thought about all the birthdays they'd forgotten because of Vanessa's events, the graduation they left early, the jokes about Ethan's career, the laughter every time they called our wedding cheap. Then I answered as calmly as I could. I won't lie to protect choices you made. She started crying again. We're still your parents. I took a slow breath. And I will always be your daughter. But being family doesn't erase responsibility. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I wished her well and ended the call. A week later, my father asked to meet me for coffee. He looked older than I remembered. The confidence that had once filled every room was gone. He apologized, not perfectly, not dramatically, but sincerely. For the first time in my life, he admitted that he had spent years measuring success by titles, salaries, and appearances, and in doing so, he'd nearly lost the one relationship that should have mattered most. I accepted his apology. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't mean pretending the past never happened. It simply meant refusing to let it control my future. Today, Ethan is still teaching history. He still spends Saturday mornings mentoring students who need extra help. He still believes kindness is more valuable than status. And every time I look at our wedding photos beneath those glowing lights in the botanical garden, I don't remember the people who laughed. I remember the people who stayed, the people who celebrated, the people who proved that love isn't measured by the price of a venue, but by the hearts that show up inside it. If my parents taught me one lesson, it was how painful conditional love can be. If Ethan taught me one lesson, it was that genuine character will always outlast appearances. And if our wedding proved anything at all, it's this. The people who judge your worth by your budget often discover far too late that they've completely misunderstood what real wealth looks like. If this story reminded you that respect can never be bought, and that true family is defined by the people who stand beside you when it matters most, I'd love to have you join our community. Subscribe to Revenge Diaries for more stories of betrayal, resilience, and unforgettable justice.